Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chapter 1 for Adobe After Effects CC 2017 Classroom in a Book. We're at Weber State University. For those of you who are happening across this lesson, hopefully you're not, because I embarrass myself way too much because I don't edit these videos. But welcome. We are going to get acquainted with After Effects today. This is After Effects. When you start After Effects, you are greeted with this box. You can, from here, you might have some previous files that you've done will be loaded up in here, but these computers reset themselves every time you turn them on so that people don't accidentally mess up the operating system. But you can either create a new project, open a project, but there are also team projects. We're not really going to get into that much this semester, but After Effects, in order to run, needs to have a project open. So if I just click New Project, this dialog box will give me a spinning beach ball. The software will crash, and we'll be starting the lesson over again. For real though. Okay. It'll just go away. So as of right now, I have an untitled project with nothing in it. So if you're starting a new project, the best practice right now would be to save this. Even though you haven't done anything, you don't want to lose any work that you might do. There have been several times where I've started working and I've worked on a project for like 2 hours and I look up and I see untitled project. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been living on the edge here. So I'm going to hit Command S, Command Shift S, and that'll bring up my Save As dialog box. So for those of you who have the file, the class files already, they provide you with this nice folder in Lesson 1 for you to save yours. So I'm just going to call this Scott Lesson 1. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. You're not going to be turning these in. It's really just they're giving you a place to save them. We'll probably talk more about file management next week to make sure you keep all your files organized. But here's the workspace. This is a pretty typical workspace. You can customize this all you want. The way After Effects is put together is with different panels. The panels are always locked together to provide you with utilizing your space as much as possible, because you can end up with a lot of panels. And this is one of the reasons why I like to use either an ultra wide monitor for extra real estate or 2 monitors to have extra real estate for placing extra panels that I need to use, because I like to keep my video that I'm working on as big as possible. But this is your project panel. This is where you will bring all your assets in, organize them, and keep them collected. This is where you access all the assets that you're going to be using. Right here, this piece of real estate is for the composition panel. It by default will share space with the layer panel that you'll accidentally open up lots and lots, because you'll accidentally double click on layers and then it'll open it up in the layer panel. And then you'll say, why isn't this working right? And it's because your layer panel shares the space with your composition panel. Down at the bottom, this is your timeline panel. And then we also have over here effects and presets, an alignment panel. So everything that is available to us right now, you can find in your window menu. And everything with a check mark next to it is in your workspace somewhere right now. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff without check marks, a lot of panels that you can open up and work with. Another panel that will show up as soon as we apply an effect is the effects controls, and by default that'll share space with the project panels. It'll just be another tab within the project panel space. So let's start by importing some stuff. Anybody want to tell me how to import something? It's very similar to Premiere.
Drag and drop.
You can drag and drop. That's one way. What's another way? Command I. What's another way? Double click in this project panel. Y'all remember. If I see you going up to the File menu, hovering over Import and selecting File, I'll smack your hand. Actually, I can't legally do that, but I'll really want to, because that's the slowest way to import something. The only reason why I would do this is because I'm trying to teach myself this thing right over here. That's the keyboard shortcut. So if there is a keyboard shortcut for something, look at it right here, commit it to memory, and then never go to this menu again with your mouse, because it's a waste of time. You need to get fast so you can charge people more money, right? Okay. So I'm going to hit Command I. I have my recent folder open, so I'm just going to navigate up to the Lesson 1 folder, go to my Assets folder, and I've got 3 assets. I can import all 3 of these right now. It'll do something to the Photoshop file that I'll explain here in just a second. But if I click Open, after selecting all 3 of those, they all come in. Now, Photoshop files are layered, right? You can have multiple layers, and ideally you would want to bring them into After Effects so that you can separate those layers out and animate them in one at a time. Okay, so because that's what the power of using After Effects. But because I imported this Photoshop file with other assets, by default the Photoshop file came in as a flat object. So it's like importing a JPEG or a PNG. There's just the one image. So I'm going to hit Command I again just to show you the difference. I can bring this Photoshop file in on its own, and I get this dialog box that says, how do you want me to import this? If I leave it as footage, it's going to import as a flat image again. If I do composition, it will import it as its own little sub animation that you can create with splitting all the layers apart. If you do the composition and retain layer sizes, you have a Photoshop file that is a certain size. If you just import it as composition, even if you have a layer that's just like a teeny little object down in the corner, that layer will then be the size of the entire Photoshop file. If you do retain layer sizes, you can then have that layer be just its own size. Okay, see this binding box that's around the title now? That means that layer is the size of itself, instead of, if I were to click on it, not retain layer sizes, this would open up and the binding box would be the entire Photoshop file size. Okay, so this is a little, see how I'm moving this object around? That can be animated. I'm moving this title here around. That can be animated. So each layer can be broken up and animated on its own. But we want to do an entire composition with our little dog swimming. So if I double click on the dog swimming, it will come up in a footage panel that shares its space with the composition panel. Okay, so they're 2 different things. This is where you can kind of preview your footage and make sure you know what you're going to get. You can also set, much like a video editor, you can set an in and out point. So if I set an in point there and an out point there, then when I drag this down into the timeline, that's all that's going to come down. Okay, so I'm going to bring that back out, get the whole thing. Now, in the video editor, who uses Final Cut in here? Who uses Premiere? No Final Cut users. That's a first. All right, so we have sequences in Premiere. We use compositions in After Effects. Okay, so to create a new composition, there are 3 different ways. Take your Premiere knowledge and think of what one of the ways would be. Okay, I already have a timeline open, so if I drag this into the timeline, it's just going to add it to this timeline, this sequence. this composition. Terminology, folks. This title Photoshop file is a composition. See that little symbol? That's the composition symbol. So right here we have create new composition button. So if I click on that, I can create a new composition. The thing is though, the properties of this composition, we want to match the footage, right? We want the frame rate to be the same. Ideally, we want the resolution to be the same. So just like in Premiere, we can right click on this and create new comp from selection, or we can drag this down onto that icon and it'll create a composition that has the same frame rate, same resolution, and is the same length of that piece of footage. Okay, so very similar to Premiere. We can also, I'm going to undo that right now, we can also take multiple assets, and I'm going to take this comp. We can drag all three of those simultaneously down to this new composition button, and it'll give us some options. We can make a single composition, multiple compositions. Sequencing layers means they won't be all stacked on top of each other. It'll stagger them out so that they're back-to-back lengthwise. You can set a still duration so that the Photoshop file will be a certain length. But I'm going to create a single composition, and that's probably fine. So click OK, and I have my movement, my music, my swimming dog, and my title all down, stacked on top of each other. Now let's talk about, oh wait, one problem though with this. See this? See all this black space? My preference would be to create a composition from the footage first. That way the composition is the same size. So I'm going to undo again. Redo this whole making a composition from the selection. Then from here, I'm going to drag my title composition that was based on the Photoshop file and my movement.mp3, and I'm going to put it down here on the bottom. Now, with audio files, this MP3 file, it can be stacked anywhere in the layer order. It doesn't matter because it's just audio. So what I like to do is put my audio stacked on the bottom. And with my timeline panel, I can now just grab any layer and drag it up or down to restack them. Okay. Right now my title is on top of my video, but if it were below, I can't see it. So this is the same thing as Photoshop. Whatever's on top, that's what you see on top. So the stacking order, the video file right here, that's on top, so that's what I see. Even though the title is there, I can't see it because the video is covering it up, right? So I want to make sure that my title is on top and my video is on bottom so I can see them both. All right. Any questions about stacking? All right. So let's talk about the timeline panel a little bit. We have a few things. Let's go from left to right. Starting from the left, you have the eye, which will turn that layer on and off, visibility. Okay. So if the eye is gone, the visibility is gone. If the eye is on, then it's there. This little symbol is the audio symbol. So if there's audio in this dog footage, but I don't want to hear it, I can just turn that off. Next column over is the solo layer. So if I have a composition with 100 layers in it, and I want to see what just one layer is doing, I can solo that layer by turning that on. Title. It looks like I'm turning off one other layer because I've only got 2 layers right now, but if there was lots of stuff going on and I only wanted to see one thing, I could just solo it. Next is the lock. There are some effects that are transparent on a layer that is transparent, but if this title were the full size of this, but I was trying to do effects below it, if I clicked up here, I would accidentally be selecting that layer all the time. Or if I want to like lock that layer into place, you just lock it, and then I can't select it anymore. See, I'm clicking on the title, but I'm grabbing the dog footage. That's because the title is locked. I can't even select it here. Next over is the source name. So this is you can rename this. You can like hit enter and call it something different. Video. It doesn't actually rename the file, and it doesn't rename it in your project, and it doesn't rename it on your computer. This is so you can name things on your own. So that it's like we could have several copies of this title with different effects on it. Well, in order to specify that so that you can keep it organized and not be confused as to which layer is which, you can rename it. I skipped a column. This column, this little drop-down arrow will reveal properties. Okay. Most properties you can access with key commands, so you don't always have to be twirling these arrows down. Next over is color coding. So if you want to group all of a certain object as a color, you can change them all to the same color, and then you can right click and you can say select label group, and then everything with that color label can be selected. So that's helpful. So next over, our little shy guy. This again is one of those things for if you have lots and lots of layers, you can make them shy, and then when you turn on the little shy guy icon over here, it just hides them from view. That way you're not trying to sift through hundreds and hundreds of layers, because compositions can get pretty gnarly. All right, and then let's make them. This is the redraw or rasterize icon. This does lots of things. So if you have a vector graphic like an Illustrator file, this is what makes it so that if you turn that on, it will always be crisp no matter how big or small. It does other things, but we'll get into that in other chapters. This is your quality. This is the best quality. This is a sliding quality. This is draft quality. I always just leave these all on high quality unless I'm really trying to look at something that's complex. This next one, it will turn on and off effects. I don't have any effects on these, so it's grayed out. This is frame blending, so if I have a blend mode, it'll turn the blending on and off. And then this is motion blur, so if I have things that are moving really fast, I can add blurriness to the motion to make it more realistic. This is for making something an adjustment layer. So if I make this an adjustment layer, it goes invisible, and then anything within the opacity of that layer will affect every layer below it if I put an effect on it. We'll get into that more. This makes the layer 3D, puts it into 3D space, and then this makes it so you can lock it to another layer. So if I draw the pick whip from the title to the video, then no matter where I move the video, the title will move along with it. That's what the parenting does. All right, let's turn that off. Down in the very, very bottom left corner of your workspace, there are two other little buttons that expand more columns. One of those is your blend modes, your track mats, which we'll get into later, and then your retiming, so you can like speed up footage and slow it down using this. All right, so I'm going to turn that one off to save space. And then if you don't want to have all these columns open, this toggle switches modes button, it's like right there. We'll just switch between this one and that one. It's way down there. Sorry, it's like off the screen. All right. So let's get into some transform properties. Right now we have this title here, right in the middle of the screen, right? We don't want that title in the middle of the screen. We want it to be down off to the side. You can just go up to your composition panel and drag it down. You can grab any of the corners and manually resize it. Holding down Shift will constrain the vertical and horizontal properties. And then you can place it there. Another way to change the position. Let me undo all that. If I have this layer selected, see it's selected here, has the binding box around it, shows its anchor point in the middle, highlighted down in your timeline panel. The other way to select it is to select it in the timeline panel. Okay, so you can select it either place. If I hit P on my keyboard, that'll bring up the position properties. If I hit A, that'll bring up my anchor point. If I hit S, that'll bring up scale. If I hit R, that'll bring up rotation. And if I hit T, that'll bring up opacity. T for transparency. Okay. If I want to see multiple properties, I hold down Shift and hit P, R, S, A. So I can reveal or hide any property that I want without having to go to my mouse and twirl this down and then twirl this up and down. Okay, so A for anchor point, P for position, S for scale, R for rotation, T for opacity. So these are coordinates. The position coordinates are based on this top left corner being 0, 0. 640 by 360 is in the center. So if I click on this number, drag it to the left, moves left. This number, drag it to the right, moves down. Okay? So 0, maximum. Whatever size this is. What is it? It's like 1280 by 720. All right. So as I drag this around, you can see those values change. So if you want it to be a round number, if you're like a mathematical person, have to have all your numbers precise, you can type in a number, an even number, hit Tab, type in another even number, and it'll put a precise value in. Same with scale. You can click on this, drag it down to scale it uniform, or you can just type in 50% to make it 50, exactly half its size. Okay. All the same stuff can be done to video. So I can change the position, hold down Shift, S, R, can rotate it, I can scale it, I can move it around. Okay. All this stuff can be keyframed as well. See the little stopwatch over to the left? That, if I click on that stopwatch, it'll add a keyframe and make it so that I can animate any of those properties. So anytime you see a stopwatch, those properties are animatable. We're not animating quite right now though. All right. From here, let me turn this back into a color that differentiates it. From here, if I double click on this title, which is the Photoshop file, right? It will open up the Photoshop file in its own tab in the timeline window. That means I can do a little animation in here, and then when I go back to the swimming dog composition, that animation will happen as one object within the animation. So you do animations within animations within animations. So if I double click on this, here's one cool thing about Photoshop is if you have a text layer in Photoshop, you can right click on that and convert it to editable text. Missing font. Okay, fine, just substitute whatever, I don't care. Happy. So I just changed the text. You can, to activate the type tool, you have to hit Command T, and that'll activate the type tool. Or with the selection tool, which is V, to do the selection tool, I can just double click on it and it'll highlight the text, converts it to the type tool. So you don't have to hit Command T if you want to edit the text. Unless it's buried underneath other layers and you want to make sure you're doing it. So the hard return on your keyboard will do a line break. The soft return will deselect text, just like Photoshop. This ellipse tool is pretty cool because now in Photoshop, if you create a shape layer, it'll import it as a shape layer. So this has an actual path that I can now select the points on, and I can change the shape of that. So anything I do here, if I make a change here, it's automatically showing up in the swimming dog comp. I don't know why I keep getting the beach ball. See, so it's changed. So now I have a happy bean title instead of a title here, oval. All right, so spacebar will allow us to preview as well as After Effects can. So if I hit spacebar, it's not quite playing fast. After Effects is not real great at playing unless it's been rendered. But now that I've played it once, if I hit spacebar again, see this green bar up here? That means I should be able to preview it easier. Okay, great, right? Another thing we have, let's do a little bit more with this text. Let's go up to the Effects and Presets panel and type in blur, B-L-U-R. Let's just do Smart Blur. So from here, you can just drag this onto the layer itself, and you can turn up some blurriness. That's a weird blur. I've never actually used that one before. I didn't think that would be so crappy. Let's do the channel blur. We can blur red, blue, alpha blurriness. Okay, I just turned up all the blurriness. Now what I want to do is make that fade in over time. So I'm going to turn on all the stopwatches. And then I'm going to go forward in my timeline to 2 seconds. There are a couple of ways I can do that. I can either find it here, see the little 2 down there. If I hit plus, I can find 2 seconds. Or I can go over to my time code, select it, and type 200, 2 seconds and 0 frames, and that'll put my playhead right at 2 seconds. Now, if I go to all these blur settings and type in 0 for all of them, over time, that 2 seconds, that's going to blur fade in. Ooh. So now if I go back to Swimming Dog, go back to the beginning, hit my home key. Ooh. So special. So we've done a little bit of animation. You're a little bit acquainted with the workspace. We've created a composition. Let's see if I missed anything from the book. We changed the title. We did a different animation than the book does. But There are some other things that the book covers. Just so that you know, if you are working on your computer at home and you can't hear the sound, or these computers have like USB headphones and stuff, and you're not hearing it in your headphones, um, your After Effects preferences menu will allow you to change your audio hardware independent of what your operating system is doing. Okay, so if you're trying to play back sound and you're not hearing anything, it might be because Premiere is trying to use a different setting than your computer is using. So you just go up here and you use whichever setting your headphones are plugged into or your speakers are. Another thing about appearance is you can change like the appearance of your workspace. So if you don't like a dark workspace, you can make it lighter. Yeah. I think that might be the main one for now. So if you're not hearing sound, that's how you can troubleshoot that. I think that pretty much covers chapter 1. I got in a little bit deeper than the book does, but if you want to redo chapter 1, you can. And that'll conclude lesson for today, unless anybody's got a question for the video. Question for the video. Okay, have fun After Effectsing.